So first, a few words about myself. As was said, my name is Dan, and I work at Wix. My role at Wix is that of the performance team lead for Wix, tech lead for Wix, which means that I'm responsible for all the technical aspects of performance in the Wix platform and websites built on Wix, which means that on a good day, I can come home and tell my wife that today I made 110 million websites load and execute faster. And she doesn't care at all because she's really not into the technology stuff and it's not really important for her. But for me, it makes me feel really, really good about such days. Unfortunately, it's not every day. You also have my email and you have my Twitter account and also the link to the Wix engineering blog, which has a lot of good articles on it, and I highly recommend visiting that site. So how did this all come about? It came about because, and why am I showing something about Twitter here? And the answer is that when I investigate stuff, when I research and look for different ways to implement various things, and I mostly work in JavaScript, I every once in a while encounter what I consider to be weird or strange or unexpected JavaScript behavior. That's not surprising. The language itself can sometimes be a bit weird and unexpected. And when that happens, what I do is I like to stop and investigate it, research it, understand it. I can't just accept something being the way it is without trying to understand why it behaves in the way that it does, why it was made in the way that it is. Now, to make it more fun for me, I like to turn these investigations into riddles. And when I do, I tweet them. And I found that a lot of people interact with my tweets when I do that. It's fun for me, and apparently it's also fun for other people who try to solve my riddles online. And by the way, if you want, you can also start following me, and hopefully the next time I'll post a riddle, you can try to solve it, or even better, you come up with riddles and I will try to solve them. So a couple of words about the rules of this game. Like I said, it's going to be a game, and here are the rules. So first of all, your participation is a must. If I ask a riddle and you just sit there, then it's no fun and nothing happens. So try to think about the solution. Don't be afraid about providing a wrong solution. I'm not going to be giving you a lot of time. So obviously, you won't have a lot of time to think about it. Try the best that you can. The second thing is, if you already know the answer to one of these riddles, because, I don't know, you happen to see it somewhere before, then please, give other people a chance to try to solve it. So participate in a riddle only if it's the first time that you saw that riddle. Obviously, I see that you don't have computers in front of you, which is great. It means you're paying attention. But, using a computer, opening the console, typing in some of the code, that's cheating. So don't do that. And finally, raise your hand. Don't shout. We want to give other people a chance to think about it. So even if you think you know the answer, don't just shout it out. Raise your hand. I will try to pick you out according to the order, more or less, hopefully accurately. The people here will help me. And then you can try to give the answer after everybody had a bit of a chance to think about it. Okay? Rules are clear? Yeah? You can do that, but that also would be cheating. So don't do that either. Okay. So let's start with a relatively easy riddle. Sorry. What's the output of this code? Here is a code which defines a function, some default arguments, and then I invoke the function with 2 arguments, undefined and null. Who was the first? Was he the first? Okay.
I think
Go ahead.
It will be 1, null, and 3.
You're absolutely correct. It is 1, null, and 3. So Here's your rubber duck. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, okay, so that's the answer, but why is that the answer? So here's the riddle just on the side, so you remember the code. And the reason is that according to the ES6 specification, default function parameters allow formal parameters to be initialized with default values if no value or undefined is passed, which means that it treats an undefined being passed in as if nothing was passed in. Null is not undefined, and consequently, null is just handled as null, which for me is yet another reason not to use null, or to use null as little as possible in your JavaScript code. I hardly use null anymore. I just use undefined wherever I can. And as a side riddle, which I only just more or less now thought about, and consequently it's not in the presentation, if you can think about an example where in the JavaScript where you have to use null and you can't use undefined. Anybody? Yes? Over there?
So null is not an undefined, so you're saying that null, if you want to say directly that this variable is nothing, but this is not a reference.
Yeah, but yeah, that's not exactly what I meant. I meant a specific place in JavaScript where you to have certain functionality, you have to use null and you can't use undefined at all. Yeah?
You want to create an object without the prototype chain.
Correct. Correct. Object create, for some reason, if you don't want to have a prototype, I missed. If you create an object using object create, and you don't want it to derive from anything, you don't want it to have a prototype, you have to pass null. If you try to pass undefined or don't pass anything at all, it will just throw an exception, it won't work. So that's an interesting example of where null is actually still required. Okay, moving on to riddle number 2. I call this SOS because it's all about dots. And as you know, SOS comes from the Morse code, dot, 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 line, 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 or dash, 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 dot, dot, dot. So, as we know, you can definitely use a single dot or a single period in JavaScript code. It can mean either a property access, so you do obj.property, or it can be the decimal point, so 4.2 in this example. With ES6, you can now, 3 periods are also now legal. It's the spread operator. You can use it in this case to spread the internal array into the external array. My riddle, though, is this. Are 2 consecutive periods ever allowed in JavaScript code? And I'm not talking inside a string or regular expression. I'm talking inside the JavaScript code itself. Is it ever legal to have 2 dots, one after the other? Just a second, before you answer, let's give everybody, you were first, but let's give everybody a little, 2 more minutes to think about it. Think if it's ever legal, and if so, when you might use it. So you 2 guys, but there was somebody here before. Okay, give the answer, please.
You're allowed to use 2 dots on a simple number when you want to call number methods on number prototype.
That is correct. Maybe I need somebody to help me get the ducks out of the bag. Okay, now I hit. Okay, so that's the answer, and let me explain it and why it is. So it's allowed, and here's the case. The thing is, I'm always surprised. I talk to people, especially people coming to JavaScript from programming languages like Java or C++ or C#, and they say, well, JavaScript isn't object-oriented, or at least they used to say JavaScript isn't really object-oriented. And when I ask them why they think that, they would say, well, JavaScript doesn't have classes. And now it does, but they used to say this a lot before ES6 came along, and it really surprised me because if anything, JavaScript is more object-oriented. It's not class-based object-oriented, but it is object-oriented. It is object-oriented to the extent that in JavaScript, essentially, every entity is an object. Even numeric literals, like just write the number 1 or 5 in your code, can be treated as if it's an object. And that way more than those supposedly more object-oriented languages like C# or Java. So that means, what does it mean that a numeric literal can be an object? It means that you can invoke methods and access properties on numeric literals. But here's the problem. If you just wrote 1.toString, then JavaScript will have a problem with that because it expects that single dot to be the decimal point. So the way to work around that is to use 2 periods. And this code actually works. You can, as was said in previous talks, you can copy and paste this and you will find that this will work. Obviously, X needs to be defined somewhere, or if you do it in the console, you can just write it this way. And this is essentially equivalent or shorthand for writing it in this way, with the added benefit, I assume, that JavaScript knows that 42 is an integer and it's not a floating point number, so maybe it can do optimizations around that. But this is really, one is really the shorthand for the other. So this is an example of where you can use 2 consecutive periods in your JavaScript code. Good on you guys, you're solving all the riddles so far. This is really nice. Okay, the next one I like to call the JavaScript palindrome. It's, everybody knows what a palindrome is. A palindrome, for anybody who doesn't remember, is something that can be read the same way from either side. So for example, race car here, you can see can be read from right to left, from left to right. It comes out the same. Now in this case, I'm not writing code that generates a palindrome. I'm going to show you code that looks like a palindrome. And I'm going to ask you, is this valid JavaScript code, assuming that X is defined? That, let's say X is a variable that's declared using var or let. Is this valid and legal JavaScript code? And if it is, what is the value of X? Okay, so wait a minute, don't answer yet. Let's give everybody a minute or two. You're first. I will have you answer first. But let's give everybody, okay, you're second, I saw you there, and you're third. So let's, and you're also. But let's start with the first one. Is this please go ahead. Is this valid or not?
Yes, this is valid. Object in left side in array will be transformed to a string and used as a key.
Absolutely correct. So this is, in fact, even though it looks really funny, strange, and weird, not as weird as Martin's code, but still very strange and weird, this is perfectly valid JavaScript code. And what does it mean? So again, this is ES6 code. So if you're thinking in the world of ES5, then it's not valid. But let's face it, all the browsers now are ES6. So JavaScript, ES6 is JavaScript. And one really cool aspect or feature of ES6 is that it lets you specify property names as expressions. In the past, when we wrote ES5 code, I would see a lot of code examples where people would create, let's say, empty objects, and then they would add properties into these objects. Let's say they do x equals empty object, and then they would do x and open square brackets, and because they needed to compute the property values on the at runtime. So they had to do this after the object was already created by adding additional properties onto it. I didn't show you the duck. Whoa. Okay, so with ES6, you can actually create or compute the property directly when creating the object. And the way that you do that is that you put the expression inside the square bracket. So for example, in this case, I'm creating an object that has meaning of life with a value of 42. But the expression empty object. As we know in JavaScript, everything can be translated into a string, and the empty object will be translated into the string object. And as was said, on the right-hand side, we simply have an array with an empty object in it. So basically, this is equivalent to creating the following object. Okay? Cool. Not for now. For later, you might come to me at the end of the talk if you already have the solutions, and I'll give you ducks if I have any left. Here are two additional palindromes, or almost palindromes actually, that you can think about and try afterwards. We won't spend time on them right now. So this is not quite a palindrome. As you can see, the parentheses are not exactly in the correct order. But again, it's the same sort of a question, whether or not it's valid JavaScript. And if it is, what does it mean? And likewise, here's another one that again almost looks like a palindrome. This time, the X is actually part of the supposed palindrome. Again, it's not exact. There's an extra equal sign on the right, but it's still amusing, and again, whether or not it's valid, and whether or not, and what does it actually mean. Okay, moving on. So again, these are almost palindromes. Default values. For me, default values are one of my favorite additions in ES6. I assume all of us who code in JavaScript have at one point or another wrote code that said, you know, like X equals X or 7 or something like that. And so it was like really a cool hack or trick the first time that I did it, but very quickly I came to hate it. And the reason that I came to hate it is that it can lead to bugs, but it's also not declarative. When I specify a default value for an argument, in a function, I want it to be part of the function signature. I don't want this to be hidden somewhere inside the code of the function. This way, you know, it's easier for people looking at the signature to understand and to be aware of this behavior. It's also easier for IDEs to actually show it to you while you're writing code and writing code that calls this function. So, but it can also lead to some interesting behaviors. So let's say I have 3 variables called target, val, and def. Can you provide the shortest expression that assigns a val to target, but if val is undefined, assigns def instead? In other words, what I want is something equivalent to this. Okay, so if val is different than undefined, you get val, otherwise you get def. Now, if you were going to suggest target equals val or def, as I said, I never liked this. This isn't good enough. Why isn't this good enough? This is not a riddle. This is just a question for the audience. Why isn't it good enough? Correct. If val is any falsy value, can be actually the value false or 0 or empty string, it will all translate to false, and we will get def instead, where I specifically stated that I want to do this only for undefined. So can you think of, and I actually gave a bit of a hint before when I was talking about default values. So can you, okay, I saw you, but let's give other people a chance to think about what might a possible, okay, go ahead. Wait a minute, take the microphone, please.
You can write target equals function that gets a parameter val, default parameter def, and it returns val, and you call the function implicitly.
So I'll give you a rubber duck, but this is not the full answer. So the answer that was proposed was to create a self-executing function. We can write it very shortly using arrow and specify a default variable with the value def, pass val in the parentheses. As we saw in the first riddle, if val is undefined, it will use the default value, and then we will get it into target. But that's not the solution that I'm looking for, because there is a shorter solution. I'll give you one more. Okay, you're back there. Wait a minute, here's the microphone, please.
Does it work? Well, I don't think it's the right answer, but I would probably try to extend this solution with an OR operator. I would write like in what do we call it? Parentheses. In parentheses, whether val equals void 0 and val, then I close the parenthesis, or def.
Yeah, so basically you're using void 0 instead of undefined. By the way, void is one of the funniest operators in JavaScript, and probably we can create all sorts of riddles around that, but that's not the solution that I'm looking for. So here I finally,
Sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, somebody.
Maybe we should use type off or something.
No, not type off. Type off would just make it longer.
We can use destruction.
You're on your track. Can you be more specific?
Parentness and...
Okay, I'll take that as a valid answer. Let's see if I can hit you with a duck. Okay, so that was actually the correct answer. So this is actually not a riddle that I came up with. This is a riddle that somebody else posted. I don't even remember if he posted it as a riddle or basically just showed, here, look at this cute code. But anyway, I turned it into a riddle. So here's the solution. The thing is that we can use destructuring, and the thing to remember is that destructuring is not only for arguments, it's also for JavaScript, basically any type of JavaScript expression. So I can actually write a JavaScript expression in destructuring that looks like this. This basically assigns 1 into A, 2 into B, and 3 into C. It also works if it's objects and not just arrays. And here's the other interesting thing. Even in expressions, again, not in function calls, I can actually use default values when doing destructuring. So in this case, if meaning of life has a property called answer, and the value of that property is not undefined, the answer variable will get that value. Otherwise, answer will get 42. And when we combine these two things together, we get the solution. And here's the solution. Basically, what happens is I put val into an array and I destruct it into the other. So I basically take val into target. But if val is undefined, I use the default value, which is def, and that gets assigned into target. Cute, no? Yeah, it actually does work. I tested it before I came here. So yes. Okay. Oh, sorry. Again, bonus question. What if val is null? But actually, I think we answered that in the first riddle. Okay, one more. Let's see how many I can fit in. And maybe I'll run on if you don't mind. I don't have a lot of time. We'll see. Okay, one of the cool things in ES6 is that we can define functions in new ways. It used to be that the most commonly used keyword that I would use when writing JavaScript code, I think, would be function. My code was just full of the function keyword. And all of a sudden, with ES6, I hardly use function anymore. It's either array or just a shorthand member notation. And so here are two ways in which I can define a function and assign a reference to that function into the variable f. And now the riddle, given this f, how can you tell if it was defined the first way or the second way? And if you're going to suggest toString, you can take your hand down right now, because I'm not going to accept toString. And why am I not going to accept toString? First of all, because it's ugly. but even more significantly because it's actually quite difficult. Because you can have an arrow inside the function or a function inside the arrow. So parsing the string correctly to verify is going to be difficult and again, quite ugly. So I want a solution that doesn't utilize toString. Okay, I saw you. I don't know which one of you were first. I saw them back there as well. You came later. You already have a duck. So I'm going to give, let's give you the microphone. Oh, I think this, he was first? I don't know. So him over here.
I believe we can tell by the arguments object and the function.
No, but that means I'm asking from the outside, not from the inside. You're giving an answer about how the code inside the function might know if it's inside this kind of function or not. That's not my question.
Yeah, okay.
My question is, given f from the outside, how I can determine. Do you have an answer for that or no? Okay, I saw you and I saw you were there. You were before, so over there. With okay. But these functions don't have names. These are two anonymous functions. No, don't be sorry. You know, you tried. You have a solution? Okay.
You can call them with a new operator. In second case, you will get exception.
Yes, but it's not quite the solution that I'm looking for. It's almost, because that actually requires calling the function, and which will have side effects. I would prefer a solution that doesn't have side effects. So, but you're on the right track. Okay, I don't know if you were there. You were before, so you will give you. Yeah, over there.
Maybe we can find out this from context, because arrow functions bind contexts.
Again, that's from within, not from outside. You were, I think. Can we give them? No, never mind. Over there.
Maybe we can check existing prototype.
Correct. We have the right answer. Good on you. Oh, I'm going to hit the camera. So. Okay, so the answer is indeed that, and let me explain. So the thing is this. As I said, toString can be made to work, but it's very ugly, which is why I don't want it. The hint was that arrow functions, as was said before, cannot be used as constructors because they don't have their own this. The whole point of a constructor is that it can modify the value, the this. Well, there are some exceptions, but generally that's what we use constructors for. And if the function doesn't have a this, then you can't use it as a constructor. And arrows don't have their this, so they can't be used as a constructor. And because they can't be used as constructors, there's no point in them having a prototype property. So if you write this code, if you do a has-own property on it, and just check for prototype or do a dot prototype, you will find that, well, actually you want the has-own property because otherwise you're looking at the value rather than whether it exists or not. You will find that has-own property will return true for the function, but will return false for the arrow. And by the way, it also will return false for bound functions, because bound functions also don't have a prototype for essentially exactly the same reason. Oh, don't look. Okay, you didn't notice, you didn't see, right? If you saw, then don't answer. Here's the question. There are several, one of the funny things about JavaScript is that you can try to convert objects to other values. And you can use value off and you can use toString. Can you tell me in the following expression what would be the value of y? You didn't see the answer, I hope. Okay. But hold on one more minute. Let's give people a little bit more chance to think. So value of is usually used when you want to convert to some arbitrary value. ToString is when you want to add conversions to specifically to strings. Okay, go ahead. What's your answer?
So the answer is to when you will evaluate y, the string wrapper will call the method toString, so we return high. Then you go to x. X is the object, and we use the plus operation. It will call value of. It will return 7. And after that, we will refer to x just as the object. It will be just object.
So what would be the last one?
High plus 7 and plus high because it's string.
So it's high plus 7 plus high.
High 7 high.
Okay, that is the correct answer. With a certain interesting caveat, which I will show you in a second. Okay, so the answer is indeed that the string constructor uses toString, which is not surprising since we can think about it like casting in other programming languages. And the plus operator uses value of. So the first one is obviously going to be high. The second one is going to be obviously 7. The third one is the interesting case because what we have here is we have the template strings, and inside of it we're using x, and effectively we want to use it as a string, which is why all the browsers converted to string except Babel, which isn't a browser, which for some reason creates code that has empty string plus x and consequently does 7. So basically, all the browsers will generate high 7 high, but if you use Babel on it, you will get high 7 7. And now, hopefully we have, and that's one of the reasons this whole mishmash and weird behavior around toString and value of is the reason that in ES6 we now have the symbol to primitive as a much more precise way to control conversions of objects to simple values. And here's the last riddle. I think I still have, maybe I'll run over a little bit, but we still have time for that. So here's a generator which does 2 yields and then returns a value. And then I use this generator and I spread it into an array and assign that to A. So my question would be, what would be the value of A? And why? In this case, I also want the answer, an explanation of why, just a second, of why that would be the value. So again, a minute or two to think about it. Okay, go ahead.
So the value of A will be array with the first item of array with the value 1.
And that's it?
That's a good question. And 3. I guess that's 3.
No, so that's not the answer, sorry. You were there in the back?
I think the value will be 1, 3, 2, 3, 3.
1, 3, 2, 3, 3? No. Well, don't shout answers. Here you go. You please.
Yes, I guess the A would be array of 1, 2, 3. As rest spread operator, we'll call the iterator.
Wait a minute. I'll stop you here. That's not the answer. So it's not 1, 2, 3.
Sorry.
Okay. Go to the guy.
Array with 1.
We're running out of options. No, that's not the answer. You please. Wait a minute. Just a second. We'll get the microphone for you.
Only one number.
Only one?
One.
No, that's not the answer. And you, please, again. Okay, so here's a microphone, just to repeat what you said.
The A will be equal to array of 1 and 2 only.
And why is that?
Because the last 3 number will be not returned by spread operator.
Okay,
So
I'll accept it even though it's not totally accurate, but we kind of need to be moving along. You have 2 ducks. I said, no?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so the answer is, after we tried all the other permutations, is the answer is going to be an array containing 1 and 2. It's as if the 3 evaporated into thin air. But that's not actually what happens. And to understand what happens, you need to better understand how iterators and generators actually work on the inside. By the way, I have a talk on that on YouTube that you can see, where I basically just drill down into iterators and generators. So what actually happens is as follows. When you call the generator, it doesn't actually run the code that's in the generator. It's really funny. You write something that looks like a function, you call that, and the code inside isn't even executed. Instead, what you get back is an iterator object. Now, what is an iterator? And the spread operator is simply shorthand for this. So the spread operator basically uses the iterator object to iterate over the values returned from the generator. And now the iterator, when you call the iterator, it actually returns an object having 2 fields. A field called value, which contains the actual returned value, and a field called done, which is either true or false based on whether or not it's the last element. Now the spread operator continues until done has a truthy value. So what actually happens here is that it only takes the values for which done is false or falsy. In this case, what the iterator will return are these objects. Value 1 with done equals false, value 2 with done equals false, value 3 with done equals true. And since spread only goes until as long as done is false, it will actually ignore the last object returned. So the return 3 actually does do something, but spread basically ignores that value. And the same is true, by the way, about for of. If you use for of, you will get the exact same behavior as the spread operator. If you actually want to be able to use the value provided by return, you will need to write code that directly uses the iterator object, which you can do. And again, in my session on YouTube about generators and iterators, I actually show how to do that. So at the beginning of this talk, this by the way concludes the riddles and the fun part, which, if you remember at the beginning of the session, I said that it's JavaScript riddles for fun and profit. Now, where's the profit? The thing is this, we all have heard about JavaScript ninjas or JavaScript rock stars. We come to conferences such as this one in order to improve our JavaScript knowledge and capabilities so that we can become better JavaScript developers, better front-end developers. But what kind of a ninja do we want to be? Do we want to be this cool ninja, or do we want to be this kind of a toy ninja? And the answer is that we want to be the real cool ninja. And the way to do that is to better understand the tools and the environments which we use. As I said at the beginning, I don't like to be told that something is the way that it is without trying to understand why it is that way. And I believe that when there's a real understanding versus just memorization, that's the difference between a real developer, between a real ninja and a toy ninja, because with understanding you don't have to remember, the things just flow. So I want to thank you all very much for attending my talk. I want to thank you for participating in the riddles and for coming to this excellent conference. Thank you very much.